Hey, historical context for Ukraine part 2. So we talked about Ukraine as a kingdom and a power in Eastern Europe that's been around since, the 1000s, but by, the 16 to 1800s, it's being fought over between Russia, the Poles, Lithuania, the Ottomans, all these different groups. Okay. By 1921, they are a part of the Soviet Union, and under Stalin, the Ukrainian people are horribly mistreated, and some, consider it a genocide. Stalin undergoes these 5-year plans where he wants to collectivize agriculture and other industries. Essentially, it's this kind of communist, state-controlled economic idea that says, no more private land ownership. Even if you're a small farmer who happens to own their land, no, not anymore. All of that goes to the state. We're going to collectivize, and the state is going to come around and collect whatever you've grown, put it in silos, turn around and redistribute it. It is a huge disaster and leads to mass famines across the Soviet Union in the early 1930s, but especially in Ukraine. It's estimated that during these few years of this famine, anywhere from 5 to 10 million Ukrainian people died. And there's still a lot of historical debate about how much of this was just planned by Stalin, meaning the Ukrainian people, one of the important elements of their history, especially in relation to Russia, is that they are constantly demonstrating and protesting and trying to become independent. And so there are a lot of historians who believe that this famine was made worse by the fact that Stalin actually wanted to try to eliminate as much of the Ukrainian population as possible to end any possible independence movement. Then we get to World War II, and I think that a lot of us who study history are very familiar with the destruction and the decimation on the Eastern Front and deaths of Russians in World War II, but it's actually not totally accurate to say Russians. We're really talking about the overall Soviet Union. And if that's the case, 40% of the deaths amongst the people in the Soviet Union during World War II were Ukrainian people. 2 million Ukrainian soldiers, give or take, and around 4 million Ukrainian civilians. Things start to turn around when Stalin dies and Khrushchev takes over. Khrushchev in the 1950s really sees the value in Ukraine and building it up as a powerful buffer state between Russia and Western Europe and the NATO powers that are growing in the Cold War. So they start investing. It's like 20% of the Soviet budget is getting invested in Ukraine. And over time, Ukraine starts to provide the Soviet Union with a lot of its high up leadership. Brezhnev, who takes over from Khrushchev, is actually Ukrainian. A lot of the most famous Soviet athletes, mathematicians, celebrities come from Ukraine. When the Soviet Union collapses in 1991, Ukraine immediately declares its independence and declares its neutrality and gives up all of its nuclear weapons. It had the 3rd largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world, and it says, we want out, we're neutral. Follow for part 3.